Leo, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this. You studied a master's in biomedical engineering, if I'm not mistaken, and
hmm
then made the switch to corporate life, so to speak. And more recently, found that your passion lies in startups, mainly product and go-to-market type roles. Why make the switch?
It was something I came across, to be honest, by accident. I was at the time traveling abroad across Romania and Azerbaijan, and I came across a few folks who are actually familiar and veterans in that sector. At the time, truth to be told, business never even crossed my mind, to be honest. I was always thinking like I'm destined to be an engineer. I'm destined to be something in the medical sphere because that's what I found myself loving to do growing up.
Mhm.
But I didn't know that I would be love of business. Even the environment that I was in, my family and the whole setup in the environment, business was pretty much out of the picture. There was no conversation around that.
Right.
So when I traveled and I made those spokes, something inside of me got triggered, and I still remember the day. One of the guys, he was, I think it was an advertising manager at one of those companies in Azerbaijan. And what really caught my attention is the fact that the issues that they were talking about. I found myself like, okay, I can probably solve this, even though I have no prior experience whatsoever. So I thought, okay, I got nothing to lose. I tried my best to jump into the medical field to no avail. So I might as well just jump into the business and see how it goes. And that was, I think, the best decision that I've ever made. From that, it was just like I would say an upward and downward spiral into business. Successes, wins, losses, failures, lessons. Yeah, here I am now diving into AI head first, and I'm excited for what's going to happen.
Now, you've obviously held quite a few roles in a number of startups. Could you give us a bit of a snapshot of, I guess, some of the wins, as you would put it,
Snapshot off
some of the wins that you've been
wins.
able to create for clients?
Yeah. To summarize my role, it was mainly around product management and go-to-market
Mhm.
teams. So I covered between these two roles. So if I'm going to summarize, I would say a couple of wins related to product management. We once worked on a feature which is to identify users' behavior and how they interact with the product during the onboarding phase. I was working, was part of the team at this company. It's in the US, right? It was a seed stage. So basically a lean team, bootstrapped, no budget, but with just us like doing our best. And the feature that we came to identify is that as we were onboarding a lot of folks, some of them, we were having a hard time converting them to paid users. So we were trying to understand how can we measure that. So we worked with the design team and the engineering teams and CS teams and everything, and we came up with the feature. And once we implemented that, it was actually later on, I won't say duplicated. I don't want to get into trouble, but I would say it was similarly done by another video streaming platform. Let's just keep it that way. And yeah, so the result what we got is that we built a customizable dashboard, like the dashboard that you might see if you land on Mixpanel
Mhm.
homepage. And so we built that up and we were able to track users' behaviors, like what was the cutoff point, at what point those guys were stopping and then leaving the product. So we were able to identify that. We came back, we made some amendments to the user map, the user journey, and we also made a few adjustments to the in-app messaging, the pop-ups that kind of guides you through and once we did that, once we know exactly the cutoff point, we actually made a significant impact. I still remember, I can't really give you the exact number, but it was definitely way higher than before. We were seeing less churn and more actually people adopting the product and getting use of it. So that product, as I told you, was like a behavior analysis type of product.
Mhm.
Something related to GTM. There was this company, it's called, if I recall, it's called Bardine. I think it's called Bardine. It's now they're like taking their positioning towards AI and positioning and stuff. At the time, I was part of the team that worked on the pricing strategy, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of people, they were coming to we installed some heat maps and everything. And we saw that a lot of people spend a lot of time on the homepage. So that was a sign for us is that, okay, they like what they saw, they're interested in the product. But the moment they went to the product page, we saw that a lot of visitors are not really interested in that product page. Also, not a lot of conversions happening on that page. So, okay, what's going on here? Because to our knowledge, we actually broke it down the whole thing, the package. This is what we get. This is what you're going to get. This is the upgrade. What's going to get you. So on paper, it seemed pretty good, and we actually had to redesign the page. Still, no proper response. Let's just say, but after a while, we realized that the what was really stopping us is the fact that we had a lot of testimonials on the product page and not enough FAQs. So the FAQs we revamped it to include a lot of the issues or the concerns most people might have before or prior to signing up to a new product. So we made an effort to actually put these concerns and address them right off headfirst into the FAQ pages, so that even if you have any concern, you go through it and immediately hopefully you will have your concerns resolved, and that will encourage the signups for the pricing page. So that was like the hypothesis. So we tested that out and we saw some significant results about that. So the best thing I can say is that I'm a big fan of actually implementing just minor solutions first, and instead of just making a big overhaul, because that's like one of the PLG mistakes that I see a lot of companies do as well. What I have seen is that they think if the pricing is not working, then maybe they need to redo the whole design or the whole branding or something like this. No, like we don't have to go these drastic measures right off. We can start with simple things. Just go back to the user journey, go back to the onboarding. That's the main thing. Go back to the messaging. See what's your key target audience, like where they're, let's just say, talking about the mistakes, the pains, all that kind of stuff. Just make an effort, just put it there. See how it goes. Just mighty involved. And that's, I think, I would consider that a huge win, because obviously if it gets you cash flow, that's a win.
So, given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
I would say product management, basically handling the entire product development lifecycle from A to Z. That's pretty much something that I would love to do, like the inception, the development, working with the product team, the backlog, roadmaps, product strategy, PRD, all these things. I see myself, and I've seen myself dive in really hard into these things. On a second hand, I would say GTM, the messaging, positioning, USV. I also did a couple of that.
Having said that, what would be, I guess, the one key quality that you find you're able to bring to these roles to find the successes that you found?
I would say on a personal level, it's maybe my emotional intelligence. I can see how things will happen or will flow prior to actually having them live, if that makes sense. So it's something that I developed throughout the years, and I'm very happy. It saved me also a lot from working with a lot of, say, shady folks and ideas that are not really worth it.
Okay.
So that's something on a personal level. On a professional level, I would say it's probably the attention to details. Like I can't just let things fall into the cracks, because it will just come back and just bite us. And at some point, it's in the pricing or messaging or adoption or awareness, something is going to happen. So that's why I'm a big fan of I don't really like working in silos. Like I'm a part of the product teams, but in general, I would love if the product head of the department also involve the marketing teams, the sales, the design, the engineering. When it makes sense, obviously, not throughout the whole process, because working in silos, yes, definitely not a PLG thing. It's like an enterprise sales-led type of approach. And I'm a big fan of also not wasting time. Efficiency is really key. And when you involve a lot of key figures in the decision making, and everyone is aware of what to do, so that we don't really cross paths on the wrong foot later on, that will be obviously a huge. So that's how I would say.
In this area of emotional intelligence, what would you say is thing related to that businesses should know but don't?
Related to EQ?
Yep.
Good question. Businesses should know, but they don't. I would say probably it will be a good start if the approach, like the leadership approach, is not top down, maybe bottom up. I think that will cultivate the spirit of the team, where everyone's opinions and involvement is going to be heard and understood. And everyone, I think that's the thing, is that you might not be aware that you might have really good gems in terms of employees or thinking or brains in your team if you're just going to do top down approach, where it's all about the leadership. It's not about the employees. Obviously, it depends on which stage of the startup you're in. If it's to early stage, I would say, yeah, it's a good thing to actually be a bottom-up approach, because at the time you're developing the culture, you're developing the product, you need as many, let's just say, as many brains working together as possible, right? Because you still haven't reached product market fit, so that's a different story. So I would say the bottom-up approach, where everyone's opinion is heard and understood, and hopefully that will give the leadership a keen eye on which individuals that they should be including later on in their decision making. And hopefully that kind of foster more of an inclusive environment. And that's something I would say can be done.
Right. Just going to perhaps first principles and what you mentioned about product-led growth being more of a marketing strategy than a pricing tactic. Specific organizational structures would you say need to change to actually make this work?
Mm. Yeah, I understand your point. I would say it's probably we're going to have to start with something on a big level, which is before deciding to be a PLG, the company-wide strategy
Hmm.
should be to have a PLG embedded into their own system. That's the first thing I need to deal with. Is I need to deal with because most of the time they think that PLG is just a part. It's just like a part of the product section.
Yeah.
That's it, or department. Everyone else has to work in their own silos. That doesn't work that way. If there is no company-wide approach to PRD and product strategy from the get-go, then things will collapse. So that's the first thing that I would address. Probably other things that I would keep in mind is that outcome outcomes over tactics. This is something that's really differentiates sales-led approach with PLG. For PLG, especially as you're first starting out and you have no budget, outcomes over taxes, like we have to focus on delivering value effortlessly, not just implementing free models or trials. So that's the second thing I would probably advise founders to do. The second thing is that, yeah, I touched on that earlier. We should never work in silos. We should involve all teams, right? Working in sprints, I also notice like an agile environment is way better and faster during these early stages. If the company is not really willing to work in sprints, if they are a big fan of the waterfall approach,
Hmm.
then PLG is not really a good thing for them. I would say another thing I might add, customer feedback is key, but it's also a good time for you to walk away from implementing their feedback if it goes against your product vision
Hmm.
or against the power users' feedback. Because as far as I can tell, if we do a survey and I can bucket our users between power users and let's just say powerless users, for lack of better terms, I will definitely focus on the power users and I will cut all efforts on the other users, right? I will probably run retargeting campaigns to educate those powerless users. Hopefully they can be, on the other hand, my power users, because that's the thing that I want to do. I want to focus on what my customers are actually paying me for and what they're needing. That's the main thing. That's pretty much, I would say, the key transitions notes that I
Hmm.
would probably start off with. And if we get the okay on all of them, then yeah, I would say we're on the right track to be a PLG driven company.
Have you had the occasion to help a company perhaps reorganize their marketing team around product usage data?
Sorry, organize the company
Reorganize
around.
the marketing team, the company's marketing team around product usage data.
I understand your point. The thing is, there is a lot of heat and war between the marketing teams and the product teams because it all comes down to attribution. That's the thing that I noticed. So marketing team, they like to attribute that, hey, if we're gonna give you product leads or you guys can talk with them, then it was us. It was our marketing material, it was our advertising, it was our messaging that kind of made this
Mm.
transition happen for you. However, on the flip side, the product team says, no, it's because our product was so good we position the product in a very, let's just say, user-friendly way. We position it in a way that solves their problem. Your role as a marketing team was give the final nudge. They already came prepared. You just give them that extra nudge. You know what I mean? So I think it's an attribution thing. That's the issue between us, across department-wise. To remedy this thing, I never worked directly in this environment. I consider myself lucky in that field. But if I were to work in that environment, I would definitely look at the leadership because clearly something is not working collectively. Something is working, or somebody or some department is working in silos. There is no cross alignment between departments.
Uh-huh.
That's why I go back and reference the PRD documents early on because part of a PLG company, when they create the PRD document, is that there will be roles associated with each outcome. So for me as a product, I will be handling product. For the design team, there will be this individual. For the marketing team, there will be this individual. So all of the key header or key heads, they will be working together. So I will be responsible to ensure that the entire product team, not just my role, is privy and aware of what the marketing department will do, what the sales department will do. So that's like how I would approach it to remedy this friction.
Correct me if I'm wrong here. You've
Sure.
worked with user flow. Is that correct?
With user flow,
Correct.
I worked marginally. Yeah,
Yes.
I wasn't really part of the, let's just say, the main team, but like on the other team.
And when you were working with them, again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you saw the company achieving 1.5 million per employee.
Mm. Okay, I understand. So that's the power I think in my on my website. on my Notion website, I alluded to the power of product-led growth and how
Mhm.
amazing it is. The reason why I use user flow as a prime example, there are also so many others like Notion, Figma, right? The reason why I mainly focus on user flow is because they managed to hit almost 4.5 million ARR with just 3 employees. That's
Right.
significant. That's a significant use case. So per employee, you can simply say each employee kind of brought in 1.5 millions, right?
Mhm.
So that's what I advocate. This is where I love PLG. This is what I really advise a lot of people to jump into PLG and not waste a lot of time because it's if it's done correctly, then you can actually get results similar to user flow. That's pretty much why I used it on my website, like to allude to the allure and the like the pile of the gold at the end of the rainbow. You know what I mean?
Yep.
If you were to be a PLG
Yep.
driven company.
I would assume in this particular instance that perhaps educational content played a key part in enabling that level of efficiency. Would that be a fair comment?
Educational in terms, you mean the leadership where you're all aware and ready to embrace a PLG internally?
That plus also investing heavily in content to educate their potential customers and customers, of course.
Yeah, yeah. I think PLG, if I would say a lot of companies recently jumped into that, especially the last 5 to 6 years. It's because things have changed, right? So before, when you start a company, you need salespeople like the old SLG model, right? When this company is, I think it was Atlassian or Airtable that kind of brought forth the power of PLG to light, if I remember correctly. And from that moment onwards, a lot of companies started to take notes. And it's okay, these companies are starting with very low headcounts, but they're also operating on a positive cash flow. They're operating on a good user acquisition and everything is working seamlessly. And I think that kind of brought a lot of attention to PLG. So to your question, I would say it's a leadership decision to actually implement PLG from day one.
Mhm.
That's why I told you earlier, it's gotta be like a company-wide approach and not just department focus. It's not gonna work that way because we're gonna be running into silos as we touched on
Mhm.
earlier. In terms of educational content, you don't really need to invest a lot of money or efforts into content if your product is positioned the right way. Because the whole idea of PLG is that your product does the talking and does the selling on your behalf. You don't nurture any campaigns. You don't need, obviously, you need that at some point. But as you're getting started, right, you don't need to invest a lot of money on content or SEO, for example. You don't need to put a lot of money on paid ads or
Mhm.
something like that. If you do the product the right way, if the onboarding phase is really optimized, and you're taking their users to getting their own values met, right? By default, that will start the word of mouth. That will create a virality loop, as they call it in PLG, where me as a fan, I will recommend it to you. Okay, even I saw this product, you might find it interesting. Check it out. So this word of mouth will just keep accumulating over and over. So the short answer to your question is no, you don't really need a lot of educational content because your product can't do the whole heavy lifting for you from the start.
So I'm curious, if you're really focused around positioning and creating a degree of virality, what structures and processes do you need in place to allow for that virality? Because I would imagine there's some effort that goes into creating that initial momentum, but then you need to get a bit of a flywheel to keep it going.
Yes. Yes, that's a good question. So to touch on the flywheel, it all starts with keeping three things in mind. The product we're going to do, who is it going to target, where are we going to solve, and why are we different? This
Mhm.
is kind of like the main essence of a PLG, right? So the first thing, once we implement the full strategy as a company wide to adopt PLG, the second thing we will do is that we need to identify they call it like user intimacy or in the product terms, the job to be done, right? We need to spend time understanding the user or the ideal user better than anyone else in the market, right? Because the specificity here is very crucial. The thing is that our product can serve multiple user types, right? But the specificity here is key, or there's a difference. If we resist the focus to actually narrow down on our ideal customers, then our results will be diluted, right? We might hit a few home runs, as they say here and there, but we're not going to get the trophy at the end of the day, right? So the first thing I would say after implementing the strategy is that how well do we understand our ideal users' problems, need, wants, desires, and so
Mhm.
on, right? Once we get that done, once we identify our ICP, then yeah, that's going to take us a step ahead to actually implement let's just call it the irresistible offer or unique value proposition, right? This is when we say why our solutions are superior to others. why we are positioned to solve your problems better than others. We touch on a few problems the customers have, right? So all of these things, if we work to put together, then they will end up creating that virality. But there is also the other side, which I'm going to touch on later. At this point, before a lot of companies succeed, this is where I notice many of them fail. Why? Because they convey their USP mainly on buzzwords or features and not really relaying that to their users' problems or needs. So basically focus on benefits, not features, right? So that's the key thing. Once we do all of that, once we got the strategy adopted, once we have the ideal user identified, once we have the irresistible offer, now this is the key moment, which is we have to kind of have our own onboarding setup. It has to be effortless. So the way I define effortless, sign up very easily, nothing complicated, experience value, time to value, super quick, remove any friction. I'm sure you notice this, but sometimes when you try a new product, right, you notice before you try it fully, you will see this pop up at the top with say, verify your email or something, right? This is the worst thing that you can send to me at that specific moment because I don't want to see that. It's part of the time to value is that you have to remove any friction. I can verify my email later on, but first let me try your product, let me experience its value and nudge me to love it so I can later on develop a habit inside this product and then I can upgrade seamlessly. You know what I mean? All these things, any friction, it does for me. I hate seeing these pop-ups and all that kind of stuff that kind of takes me away for a few seconds to do something and then come back again. No, at that time, a lot of people that I've seen, they lose interest. It's like, why are you asking for my emails? I haven't even signed up fully. I haven't even experienced the product fully. Effortless onboarding at that time is really crucial. Now, there are so many types of onboarding. Maybe we can talk about that if we have time. I'm happy to do that. But that's pretty much the short answer, I would say, brief answer, hopefully. Once we do all of these things, virality will happen. And there are also other types of viralities we can touch on as well if you're happy to. But once we nail these things, strategy, user intimacy, unique value proposition, and the onboarding setup, I would say 9 times out of 10, you will get a good product going.
In your experience, user intimacy, I mean, there's a lot of content out there about user intimacy and jobs to be done, etc. What do you find people tend to be not investing in or getting wrong as they try to figure out this whole user intimacy part?
Oh, okay, I see. So just to kind of just a step back. So user intimacy is tied up to user mapping, and user mapping is tied up to onboarding. The issues that I saw is that a lot of people, they skip the user mapping and they just kind of jump right away from user intimacy, job to be done, they'll just call it, all the way to onboarding. That doesn't work that way because just because you identified the problems that your users are having and how your product is going to do it, that doesn't mean your onboarding setup is just going to be as simple as just adding a few buttons to sign up and adding a few messages to kind of entice the users to carry on. That doesn't work that way because most of the times, product or PLG driven startups, the product can't serve many segments or many personas. So my onboarding setup as an individual should be different than your onboarding setup as a company, even though we're going to be using the same product, even though we are trying to solve the same problem. You know what I mean? So this is where user mapping comes in, is that where do you put me as an individual? How are you going to structure my journey to use your product as an individual versus how are you going to structure your journey to during sign up, during the onboarding, use your product as a company. So I think it's user mapping. If it's not done with while keeping the user intimacy in mind, that's not going to work long term. You might get a few customers here and there, but you're not going to be targeting or locking down almost the entire segment you're after because you still don't know the ideal path for me to convert. So that's what I would say.
So with the way you're envisioning user mapping, I'm assuming that you'd actually be talking to a customer and getting them to walk you through the entire journey as they would like it to be.
Oh, no. So before we launch a product, as there is an alpha stage and beta stage, right? So alpha is an internal between the teams. We don't have to talk about that. Beta is basically when you allow early access to some users, or you reach out to users, outreach, you give them early access, or you ask for their feedback, free trials, right? Just to get their own opinion about the product. So most of the user mapping can be identified the right way when you reach out to people and you give them early access or ask them to participate in a survey or something like that. in exchange for something, right? Like, for example, the common ways to entice users who don't don't know the product is that, hey, we're launching this product. We're going to be solving X, Y, and Z, whatever problems that that user is having. And we just love your feedback. And if you like to use it later on, we will give you like X% discount for X amount of months, something like that, right? So once you get the user's feedback, it's up to the product manager to actually identify the right path and design the user mapping. That's how it should be. So I would say it's user feedback can serve as a really good launch off spot to create a
Okay.
good, solid user mapping. The rest, yeah, we can cut off the user feedback at some point. The rest has to come back to the product vision and how we want to position our product, what kind of experience we want to convey or give to the users as they sign up in the product.
Mhm.
And obviously, there are like so many things can be done here. As simple as just simply changing the button to a new color or a different color, just because that user's persona or the segment, for example, are into coming from a professional background. So they are more into, for example, black and white compared to someone who's a creative who might have a different color. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So as minor as details as it can get, based on the feedback and based on what we're targeting and based on the product vision, we kind of put together the ideal path for each persona.
Okay. With more complex products, I'm assuming that you would want to reduce the free to paid conversion time. And if so, I would imagine that there is some element of education, whether it be pre-onboarding emails or to help with that. As you think about user onboarding and reducing that free to paid conversion time, what frameworks would you use in your communication to
Mm.
minimize that conversion time?
Yeah. So most of the time, there are two ways to begin with. This is like where we start off to bombard, for lack of better
Mhm.
terms, our users to keep using our product and stay a loyal customer. The first thing is during the onboarding setup, there will be an in-app messaging that kind of guides you. These pop-up messages that
Mhm.
kind of gives you, explain the dashboard. This is your profile. This is where we get to do this. This is where we get to do that, right? So these things actually really significantly lower churns because if the dashboard is designed very well to solve my own problem and you're just giving me a quick kind of like nuggets to clarify the process to me and how fast for me as a new user who might have not had any experience working with this product before or anything, these in-app messages are going to be crucial. If you really win me during this page, then the rest of the second phase will be very easier, which is pretty much email marketing. So this is where we send you, as you said, educational content. I'm sure you've noticed a lot of companies when you sign up and after you get these in-app messages, you get an email, hey, Vinay, my name is so-and-so, I'm the CEO. I just wanted to jump in and give you
Mhm.
a quick tour or some resources, right? So this email will be very beneficial if the in-app messaging, in my opinion, was first done properly. Because if I didn't get the value at first, you might lose me, to be honest. I
Mhm.
might not be interested in the email because I already have developed an idea inside my head is that, okay, this messaging didn't really serve me. So might as well just ignore this whole thing and sign off, right? Or
Mhm.
unsubscribe. So that's why in-app messaging is very crucial. If it's done correctly, the email campaigns or whatever nurturing or any other type
Mhm.
of email content that they will send, it will be very beneficial. So I will start depending on the segment that I'm targeting. Obviously, technically, logically, if you're sending emails to a creative person, it should be different than the email that I will get as a product guy, and it should be different that you will get as a business owner because we are targeted because your product can solve different, what do you call it, different pain points. So that means different use cases for you and me and others.
Mhm.
So the email campaign should be structured according to the pain points that your product has helped me solve so far. If we do that, then
Okay.
it's going to be good. So at that time, we can send emails, we can send recordings, video tutorials, just some hidden features that you might nudge me to upgrade on later on.
Mhm.
But speaking of that, the upgrade, it's really a huge mistake if you're just going to ask me to upgrade within the first 2 weeks to 4 weeks of using your product. At the time, I still don't have a lot of confidence in your product. I'm still learning. All right.
Mhm.
So that's why it's part of the product team's work and the data analyst team is to identify the quick wins, the wins that this product has actually given me so far.
Mhm.
And later on, I will use these wins to come up with an upgrade offer. So, okay, Leo, like we noticed you use our product and using our product has, for example, saved you 2 hours of time cut down, let's just say, deficiencies by 2%, right? Whatever wins, minor as you can get, you can list them down for me. And you use this. Now I'm intrigued. It's okay. I didn't know your product actually saved me all of this money or effort or time or efficiencies or whatever. And you package that and you tell me, imagine what you can do when you do, this is the perfect segment to actually upgrade me, to upsell me to whatever extra offers that you have. And you tell me if you can do X within this package you're in, you can do X and Y and Z with this package. And you list down the extra benefits that I will get. That will be a perfect path. Once I have learned and I have enough confidence in your product, then yeah, the upsell campaign should start at least a month or two after sign up and trying the product. At least that's what I would.
So just going with what you were saying, I'm imagining that if you were to send messages on a regular basis, you're really aiming to create mini aha moments for the user every time even before they log in and while they're in the app. Would that be correct?
That would be awesome. Yeah, because I need a constant reminder to know why I signed up to use your product in the first place. Because it's safe to assume that I'm also using so many other products. I might as well be also working with your competitors just to test the water with their product as well. So it's these constant reminders, it's these small wins, it's these aha moments that you perfectly mentioned. These will get me in the loop with you. Okay, I'm interested. I'm interested. I want to know what else I can do with this product, especially if you have a sequence, for example, on a weekly basis where you send me emails or messages or wherever that is, that you tell me what I have done using your product. What have I accomplished using your product? These things will subconsciously stay in my mind because we all are motivated by wins. Small as they might be, it doesn't matter, but a win is a win, right? So I need to always be refreshed and kept in the loop of why your product has been and should be my ideal choice to stick around with and not go to other competitors. Yeah, aha moments, reminders, small wins, upgrade, small nudges to what other wins, big wins that I might get upon upgrade. That can keep me motivated.
Certainly. I imagine there's a bit of a tension between the desire to reveal all the full product capabilities versus pacing information delivery. And I'm curious, how do you balance both of those requirements?
I would look back at the customer that I'm targeting. I would look at at their background and their awareness of the product. Obviously, if you are targeting a user who is just a problem aware, but not, let's just say, solution aware yet or not ready to purchase, then obviously you should structure your campaign, email campaign accordingly. So you need to start to warm me up by offering me some educational content, the how-tos, the guides, the checklist, right? The webinars. Webinars actually can be a very good thing in terms of conversion and also awareness at the same time. So they can work wonders. That's why I really love webinars now and podcasts. I think these two forms of media, they have really huge conversion rates, especially if you're using it the right way, right? So I would say the answer to your question, it depends on the user familiarity with the product that they are using and how hurt, for lack of better terms, they are with the product or so with the problem. Are they solution aware? Are they ready to purchase? Do they need more education? You know what I mean? So it's the customer journey. It's also paying attention to the data that you're getting from me as a user of your product. Once you can have all of these things together, then you would know your product team or marketing team should know what to do next. Should we schedule a phone call? Maybe it's the right time, maybe for me to connect you with a sales agent, just have a normal conversation. Maybe it's the right time to introduce a webinar or send you case studies, right? It depends. It depends on the user awareness and which stage they are in using your product. That's what I would start off with.
So how would you determine when a person signs up? Because you're trying to reduce friction, not get them to enter too many details, etc. Are you using, say, an email address to get some background information on them? Would you suggest asking them a few questions in order to set up their particular profile and educational courses? How would you structure it in order to get enough information to put them in a particular category and structuring or tailored education for them?
Okay, so there's let's just call it the before stage and the after stage. So before stage, this is basically before you're going to the market with your product, before you even launch. Ideally, you have defined the target audience that you're after, right? So ideally, you should, as I told you earlier, you should send them some outreach, emails, the LinkedIn's, thought leadership ads, whatever, just to get as many feedback as you could from them. Once you know that, ideally you have some form, Google form, where you try to basically answer the same question, try to understand where is this customer, potential customer, is sitting right now in terms of the problem. This is where you get to ask him or her what kind of problems that you are trying to solve. What kind of solutions are you using right now? Are you frustrated with these solutions? If you can, this is like the golden question all companies use. If you can wave a magic wand, then you will have the perfect solution or product. What would it be? So when you have all of these answers stacked up, this is where you get to take these answers and you bucket your users accordingly. So at that time, you will get to know, okay, this user seems to be aware of the problem. This user says, I don't have any problem. This is quite common, all right? So you might get a response where the user is just simply passive. I have no problem. I'm using this product, for example, let's say Notion. I don't really see the need to upgrade or go to another tool like Flock or Airtable, whatever that is, right? I'm sure you've had some of these things. So at that time, that individual, you can either discard it or you can actually send him or her later on, let's just say like a retargeting campaign, not in form of ads, but just a simple conversation. It's, hey, now we launched. Assuming you decided this customer is no longer a perfect fit for you, but now you have identified the rest. Yeah, according to their answers, now you know this guy is aware, this girl is probably need an extra educational content and so on, right? So you put them into segments and you design the customer journey accordingly. And according to the customer journey, you design email campaigns accordingly, and you start the blast off period. Now, you launched and you targeted those folks, but you still remember that there are some people who were on the fence when you reached out to them first. At the time, maybe they were not ready to actually be using your product, but now a few weeks or months later, maybe they are, you never know. So this is the perfect time to actually introduce your product again, because now they get to see it live in action and they get to consciously make a comparison between what they are using and your product. So now if your product was really that good, they might even come up with their own definitions of the problems that they didn't even have the awareness of at the time. You know what I mean? So then they will be, I would say, more inclined to reach out to you if the product was really designed or created perfectly. And also at the same time, there is no harm in sending them extra materials. Okay, this is the product, play around with it. But just so you know, our product can also do X, Y, and Z, because you don't have enough info about them. As I told you at the beginning, they didn't really give you enough context. They were just passive. They were happy staying where they are. So you got nothing to lose. So you might as well just send them the best email once and for all that targets everything, how good your pricing is. Also, which is very smart move, to include some case studies of how others have used your product and kind of results that they got, timeline, the money saved, operational efficiency increase, these things. Package them together in a very nice, neat email and just send it to them right away, because you got nothing to lose and hopefully they will convert. And at the same time, in parallel, you're also waging your path towards the other users that you have identified in the early stages, right? So this is the kind of the before. The after, I would say, it touches back on what I said earlier. At that moment, data is your best friend. You have to use their data at the time to actually decide who are your power users that you have identified, and users who are still not really 100% converting. They're still happy where they are on the free trial or the freemium. So data at the time should be your best guide. This is where you get to decide, all right, how can we nudge them? And touches back earlier on the small wins, the reminders, the extra things that they can do later on. So that's what I would keep in mind.
Some advice there. You mentioned earlier preference for webinars and podcasts to drive conversions. How would you suggest, perhaps to a potential client, that they use these media formats to position themselves as trusted advisors rather than vendors?
Okay, so I'm just going to give you a prime example let's just use AI for now, because it's the main hype, right?
Sure.
Now, a lot of companies right now, or individuals for that matter, they have a lot of concerns about AI, data security, insecurity, lack of trust in AI, right? Transparency, ethics, and so on and so forth. The best way for me, I would say, if I were to a company, which I'm working on the side, that leverages AI as one of the main products, tackling trust is a huge thing. So the best thing you can do is to show, not tell. And because I can write essays of how good and trustworthy I am as an individual and the company and the product and whatever. but it's not going to cut through the chase. It's not going to get me a lot of eyeballs or attention because it's still fluff. As you can see, a lot of people are creating a lot of content and they're claiming it's yours or it's theirs, but it's not. It was stolen or created by AI, right? So now to add an extra layer of belief and to remedy this kind of gap between lack of trust and actually having full trust, I would definitely double down on visual content, on me putting myself out there as a founder or whatever personnel you have at the time to actually have some sort of a regular show on a weekly basis of, for example, on LinkedIn. I don't see the harm of for a company to create, for example, half an hour episode or webinar just talking about the AI and what you as a founder has come to accept or change your mind of, or how you're dealing with AI internally, what kind of safeguards or measures that you're putting in place to ensure that your product uses AI, let's just say, safely or efficient. People need to see, and people are not, let's just say, people are not really that naive. You know what I mean? When you talk, they can see that you're actually passionate about it. They can see that you're trustworthy. Unless proven otherwise, right? That's a different story. But the point is to increase the level of trust. People need to see you. People need to see your product live. People need to experience value so many times. And you need to kind of position yourself as the, let's just say, as the thought leader of that category. So I would probably double down on that. I would have a weekly show pop up on LinkedIn and create whatever episode about my product that uses AI and how I leverage it, how I use it, what kind of guardrails I put in place, how is the company structure. I would just go all in on that. Same goes with podcasts. Unfortunately, you can't really get into podcasts early on because it depends on the target audience you're after, and it depends on whether or not the podcast host is willing to actually advocate for your product. So I would start with webinars. I will develop a huge community and trust use webinars because webinars actually is a very good way to actually develop a community around your product. And so that later on, when you reach a podcast host, you can actually say, for example, okay, our product or audience has amassed, for example, 5,000 followers or believers or whatever you want to label them. So at the time, the podcast host will be intrigued to actually have a look at your product. That's one angle I would use probably to tackle a podcast. Another idea is to give them access to your product free. Don't keep anything of your product. Give them the full product, full features, fully exposed for them to try out for free. No hard feelings whatsoever. You just reach out to them. This is the product. This is what it can do. This is the people we're after. We feel like your audience can have a really good value out of it. And we see that you are the perfect host for that. So if you're willing, this is your product, try it out. If you like it, I'm happy to jump on board and talk and discuss with you more about that. That will give the host actually a safe launchpad for him or her to actually try your product and have some sort of a guarantee that, okay, this product is pretty good and I can actually invite this founder or whoever it might be to jump in. And at that time, you just take it from there. That's pretty much what I would do. I don't really like to complicate stuff or implement massive changes when there is no need or enough data to support that, you know.
So like, we've covered a fair bit of ground, but with this idea of perhaps, at least in some companies, where product-led growth strategy is perhaps the biggest hidden cost center, I'm curious, what would be your advice to companies in that position and looking to transform it into more of a profit engine?
I would say first things first, PLG alone is insufficient. It's good when you first started, but it's insufficient and it must integrate with a PL organization. It's not limited to the product team. For strategy also to work, I would say a clear market aligned strategy is the foundation. This involves, as I told you, the PRD and the business strategy and the product strategy. All of these three things, they should work together, serving the one goal. I would also say the strategy has to be defined at that moment. For me, a big goal like I want to create a company and build a $1 million business or whatever. Yeah, that's good, but it provides no direction whatsoever. As a great strategy should outline the specific steps, the market, the paths, the key personals, the involvement, the timeline, the risk mitigation, the operational capacity, the tech, the debt, pretty much everything. That's what it means to be a PLG company. At the top of everything, let's just say, I would say the key question I would ask myself is that how effective is your strategy in making your company, let's just say, the best choice or the unforgettable choice in your market? And are you willing to actually focus on implementing PLG from day one, or are you more comfortable implementing sales into that? For me, if you ask me, I would never add sales to any company I would work with or even start from day one. I would focus on the product because there are so many values as we touched on earlier. Like time to value is fast. You don't need to hire a lot of people, which means you get to keep a lot of your cash, right? The CAC to LTV ratio is also in your favor because you don't need to spend money on, as I told you earlier, on content or ads or whatever that is. If your product can do the job that it's supposed to do, then the LTV will be extremely higher, right? Why it's going to be higher? Because your product is already good and it's going to, by extension, it creates a good word of mouth,
Mhm.
good virality loop to it, so that your product will acquire so many people by simply being just a good product. You didn't need to pick up the phone. You didn't
Mhm.
need to send me an email whatsoever. That's pretty much what I would focus on. That's the mentality here. If this mentality is off or is not properly, let's say, accepted, then nothing else is going to matter because we will be falling back into the sales-led approach. And at that time, as the sales cycle is going to be long, the cashback period is also going to be longer. And however you want to look at it, unless you're dealing with enterprise clients, right? Then yeah, it is the perfect bet to actually include sales led into the product at some point. And I'm happy to talk about that, but there are also a few signs that you notice it is the right time for you to actually include sales into your PLG. It's only when these signs are present that you get to safely bet on adding sales to the team. Yeah.
What would those signs be?
If you're noticing that big accounts from big companies are starting using your product, okay? Because I assume you have data analytics kind of installed, so
Yeah.
you know exactly who's here and who's there. That's the sign number one. Sign number two, you start to realize that the sales cycle typically started to get longer. So for a product-led approach, typically is no more than a week, literally a week or two, where you get a conversion. If you started to realize or notice that a lot of sales are taking longer than that, then it's probably time to include a salesperson, or something is wrong with the email campaign that you've been doing or whatever. So I would probably look at the data and see what's going to happen. But most times it's the right time to include a salesperson that's going to make this conversation extra personal. It's going to
Mhm.
be my account manager, for lack of a better term. So that's something I would focus on. Another idea or note is probably related to having too many big names. You a free trial, not converted. We talked about big names from big companies, right? But we're talking about just big names or whatever. But they are stuck on the free trial. No matter what you did, no matter what email campaigns you send, they are still focused on being on a free user. So at the time, it is probably a good time to assign a person
Mhm.
to just jump in there and try to understand what's going on here. I think that's pretty much the key things that I would focus on
Okay.
to begin with. Yeah.
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 When it comes to PLG and implementing it across an organization, are there perhaps a couple of areas that you find most companies or founders or CEOs don't give much airtime to? Don't talk, they gloss
Mm.
over it perhaps? If so, what would they be?
Yeah. At the top of my head, I think it's related to product market fit deficiencies, right? So typically there are 3 to 4 reasons why you don't have product market fit without complicating
Mhm.
things. So if you don't have a product market fit, then that means that probably your value proposition is not really clear enough to the users or customers when they land on your website, right? That's not one reason I would look out. The second reason is that the aha moment is not really experienced as it should be, as fast as it should be. And probably the other one is the product is weakly differentiated. I can sum it or lump it with other products, and I can't see why your product is way different, right? So all of
Mhm.
these things, the 3 notes, probably I would look at these things first to determine the product market fit, if it's good or not. So probably a good solution for that is to conduct a user interviews, identify the value moments and map. It's a pretty good thing also to look at your competitors. And now this is actually a really good thing because you can have AI, it can do that for you. Put 3, 4 URLs of your competitors and ask GPT or whatever to actually map the competitor gaps according to their copy on their website, right? According to that, then you will be able to actually go back and see if these gaps are present in your onboarding setup or not.
Mhm.
If it's not, then it's probably we've covered your ground very well, and there is another reason. So onboarding is not the issue. It could be, for example, the what do you call that? The value. The value is not really cleared out. So
Mhm.
most of the time, I would go back to the site copy, and I would work on that. So I would work on time to value. I would work on activation rate, and I would work on user retention. So basically, these three things, they're more or less responsive to value proposition, to your aha, and to the product differentiation, right? So I would focus on that. The other issue I would say that stops founders from implementing, and it's probably the sales-led teams, they have resistance in accepting product first approach, right? Or marketing team. So as I told you, it goes back to the attribution point earlier. So that's what I would probably start to pay attention to, because that means there is no alignment cross department wise, and we need to focus on that, which means there is friction and confusion between teams, and we don't
Mhm.
want. So I would realign. I would make sure the whole engagement metrics and everything set up. I would start to understand, all right, when is the time for me to focus on a product model? When it is a good time for me to actually be hybrid, include sales and product interchangeably when it makes sense. So I would work on that. Also, maybe I haven't really seen this happen a lot, but it is still a reason, in my opinion, which is the economics. Basically, the free tier, for you to keep a free tier for free users to keep using, it's probably costing you a lot of money infrastructure wise. And if you haven't, that's why I'm not really a big fan of a free tier at all. I don't use it. If I were to have my own company, I will never have a free tier, because for me, free tier is just a marketing strategy. It's not a product thing.
Yeah.
You just use it to attract users or people, but at some point they need to pay, because otherwise, as I told you, you will be paying extra cost infrastructure just to sustain those free users who are giving you no value whatsoever,
Mhm.
unless it's intentional, and unless it's part of your strategy to make them or create some sort of an evangelist or a community around them, like Notion.
Mhm.
When they do, like, for example, I use Notion now on the free tier, and I'm happy with it. I don't see any need for me to upgrade. So the reason why Notion grew substantially is because they realized that their free tier is actually pretty good, and they had a lot of people using it. So they created their own community. So what they did to also entice word of mouth and virality and awareness, they actually entice users to create their own workflow or a Notion database and submit them. And they offered them and they gave them for free. And that's why if you look at the growth metrics for Notion, I think they're available online. You will see that community driven is one of the key factors on why they
Mhm.
drove. So yeah, I would attribute that to the free tier. So unless it's intentional, keep it. And unless you have a plan to convert those free users to something else to benefit your brand, keep it. Otherwise, I would say it's not really beneficial. So that's what I would focus on.
Okay.
Yeah, there's also probably another one, which is there's no proper data implemented, like the actionable product analytics
Mhm.
is not really there, which means it will be a poor experience to track user behavior. And we all know that like stakeholders don't own data at that moment, because if they don't have clear data to actually understand what's going on here, then they're not going to understand what to do next. And I'm sure you've done it a million times. Like when you go and meet a stakeholder or a founder or whatever, the first thing they will ask you is probably things related to risk mitigation and growth and revenue. And all of these things, they are all tied to data, because how are you going to risk mitigate something if you don't know, or if you haven't have enough data to
Mhm.
actually know this is something is going to be positive or negative. So the same thing. So that's why, thank God, there is like Amplitude or Mixpanel or Pando, or there's another one. It's an open source, which is my favorite. Actually, I forgot the name. It's Post something. It's very popular. This kind of gives you like a very detailed analytics in terms of how your users are actually using your product. And when you use that, then you will have a real-time dashboards where you get to see what's happening, or you get to see the product adoption, the visibility, the product qualified lead accuracy rate, how much are converting, how much are churning, and so on and so forth. So I would focus on that. And what else? I think I touched on 4 or 5 points, but I think there is one I'm missing here, which is a key thing related to onboarding. Okay, yeah, it's the poor self-serve experience, which is related to weak onboarding activation,
Yep.
which limits the cross-sell opportunities later on. You know what I mean? So that's why, as I told you at the beginning, once we have the job to be done or user intimacy, then we will create the user mapping or user journey, and then we will design the onboarding experience accordingly. that kind of touches back on what I told you earlier. Is the reason why we're taking the long process from job to be done to designing the user mapping or user journey all the way to onboarding is because we want to give the best self-serve experience. It touches also what I described earlier is that when you have a solid product that does the heavy lifting for you, sales wise or conversion wise, then that's it. You don't need to spend a lot of money on anything else. And this whole experience, if it was to be done correctly, then these three prior steps, the onboard, the user mapping, and the job to be done, they all had to be perfectly aligned. And when that happened, I can guarantee almost 100% that the self-serve experience will be pretty much optimal. And when we do that, I don't see anything goes wrong in the long run. And then at that time, it's pretty much data. We need to pay attention on what's happening because eventually it's the user who's going to decide or determine how we should act later on and what kind of implementations or solutions we need to do at some point.
Okay, brilliant. Leo, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Number one, don't go to PLG if there is no company-wide acceptance to a strategy to accept the PLG. That's number one. And number two, just because you're going PLG, that doesn't mean you should go surface level when it comes to doing some sort of a PLG tactics. Just offer a free trial or just include a kind of like a sign up or use the product right away. That surface level approach, it doesn't work that way. And thirdly, if your product is not converting pretty well, I would probably go back to understanding the user behavior and the user mapping and the onboarding setup. Because 9 times out of 10, pretty much all the issues that I dealt with, they were properly solved once we kind of realigned and re-amended these three categories. Number 4, don't do massive changes to your PLG unless you really exhausted the minor details here, maybe changing the buttons from sign up now to start your free 15, 14 days. Like these minor changes, just play around with minor sides of the copy. If you can run an A/B test, which I'm not really a big fan of for so many reasons, because to do a proper A/B test, you need to have enough large sample data to measure that out. If you don't have that and you're just like a lean bootstrap company, then at that time, it's either you're betting on your best bets and best practices, hopefully, and you're also incorporating some sort of user feedback into your own analysis solutions that you're implemented. That's what I would focus on. And yeah, for God's sake, don't work in silos, but just have at least key figures from each department to be present when you're doing the product strategy and the PRD. That's pretty much, I would say, that's the takeaway, to have at least a good starting point to have a good PLG going.
And if listeners, those watching, would be curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
I would say I'm practically active on LinkedIn, Leo Sadeq, and on Reddit also. I answer a lot of questions there. I'm pretty much active there, the same name. But I can give you or shoot you these URLs after the show, and you're happy to put them whenever you want. And yeah, people can reach out to me there.
Okay, we'll include them in the show notes. Leo, thank you so much for doing this. It's been brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me. I really look forward to the chat, and yeah, I was happy to be here.